Back to Bankrupt Bookseller, and back to poetry and or poetry books and poems. This section. I want a book of poetry, something for a girl. The request was put to me rather diffidently for all the bluff ruddiness of the speaker. It left me speechless for a moment. How do I know what books of poetry young girls like? How do I know that girls like poetry at all? My hesitancy was apparent to my customer, and his words went on again. She is a junior hockey international, he added. There is no reason, but decision came with the abruptness of the falling of the guillotine. Masefield, I said, the new complete edition of Masefield. He looked at the book. I do not know his work at all, he said. I turned the pages, for I knew the book well. I hesitated at Sea Fever, passed by Cargoes, and stopped at Beauty. Read that, I said. I think any girl would think that wonderful. I took the book out of his hand and showed him CLM, the thing that begins. In the dark room where I began, my mother's life made me a man. He read it through, and some of his ruddiness seemed less coarse when he got to the end. I could see, though he held the book above the level of my eyes, I could see when he read, O grave, keep shut lest I be shamed. I knew he had no wife now. I knew he had only one daughter. I knew I would sell him Masefield for that daughter. I have it, he said. I'll have it, he said, quite shortly. There is just one other I would like you to look at. It is quite short. I turned to the centurions and took the 8 and 6 away to my till while he read it. There was 1 and 6pence change, and I handed it to him to look at and he took it quite blankly. He turned on his heel, his finger in the book at the page in which the centurions is printed, and walked out of my shop. Who would believe it, the emotions that may come to struggling booksellers? I don't know the man. He was a stranger come, I fancy, to see his daughter at the young ladies' college here, and Masefield, and I marked him today. What is in poetry that makes it so a wonderful thing? I don't know, but it makes me feel an awful strangeness of men. How incalculable we are. If I had said Browning and showed him Love Among the Ruins, would the effect have been the same? Has he read, O mistress mine, where are you roaming? Oh, stay and hear your true love's coming. And if not, would these words of Shakespeare have had the same effect? Ought I not to have sold him the Oxford Book of English Verse, or its companion, the Book of Victorian Verse? The responsibilities of bookselling are immense. I shudder and almost cower now down by my shelves of business books. My eyes find repose on a shelf of Sir Isaac Pitman's Industrial Administration series. There is no certainty. There is no sense of the unfathomable immensities. There, there one can hand out one's wares without a tremor, whose soul is shaken from now to the end of time by Mr. James A. Bowie's book, Sharing Profits with Employees, or Samuel Crowther's Common Sense and Labor. These are not dynamite nor yet quicksilver. They may be the substantial bricks from which the New Jerusalem is to be builded, but they certainly feel no more than mere bricks in my hands. Poetry, I write the word. The experience is still fresh with me, and I come back to this back shop of mine to turn over my mind. I see myself, a collection of moving molecules, I suppose mostly putrefying, a sort of thickish slime on the surface of matter in which moves and stirs an emotion, a thought, a dulled, formless radiance, responsive and throbbing still to the moments when I turn these pages for my customer. It is quite inexplicable. I sit buttoned in my clothes, thatched over inadequately with hair faintly moist. My little room is too painfully cramped and little, and I go out again restless to my shop. I always like Arnold Bennett for recommending Aurora Leigh. It is good poetry to me and suits what literary stomach I have rather better than his other recommendation, Paradise Lost. His book, How to Live on 24 Hours a Day, is one of the great stimulants, was one of the great stimulants of my disordered youth. I have my own edition published by the New Age Press in 1908. I get it down and read again. Poetry, said Bennett, is the highest form of literature. It yields the highest form of pleasure and teaches the highest form of wisdom. I am all for the narrative poets in a way. What better than the lays of ancient Rome, or the lays of the Scottish Cavaliers, or the larger poems of Sir Walter Scott? I am not a vers libre man. I like rhyme and recollect Samuel Taylor Coleridge's declaration. I wish our clever young poets, there are clever young poets then as now, would remember my homely definitions of prose and poetry. Prose is words in their best order. Poetry is the best words in the best order. To a bookseller, poetry is a problem. There are some poets in regular demand, but there are not very complete series. The padded poets were a very useful stock, but folk don't take to these today. Macmillan's Globe Library is useful to me, and for a good Shakespeare I sell Dence's edition in 3 volumes. As a rule, I don't like pictures in books. Leave the ideas to the writer and his reader, I think, but in this instance I can make an exception. The other pictures do not move me, but the pictures of the Histories volume is an astonishing thing. It hasn't been noticed by anyone as far as I have heard. I mean by anyone of importance. It attempts and succeeds at showing us the idea behind the sonnets. The traditional William Shakespeare, a young William Shakespeare in high-collared cloak and with doublet and point-embroidered cuffs, is pulling a curtain over the face of a figure hiding from us, the mysterious Mr. W.H. This remarkable picture is by E.J. Sullivan, a fine illustrator. For the rest, poetry is a passing thing. Ben's Sixpenny Poets was a work of national importance for which Sir Ernest Ben deserved a baronetcy, had he not already inherited one. These paper-covered leaflets, I wager, gave and give more joy than all the legislation passed since the war. They must have opened the door of poetry to thousands, and I know in my little way I have sold hundreds. Instead of raising the school age or raising the pay for teachers or building bigger schools, my politics are to give prizes and subsidies for good books. We have the Hawthornden Prize for authorship. Why not a prize for publishing? I am all for giving honor to the writer, but I know the courage that goes to make a publisher. These writers think themselves brave figures on the boards of life, but they would be poor ghosts but for the bold publisher who bodies them forth. If poets had to make their living by reciting to living ears, the calling would cease to be a drawing-room one. The publisher saves these shy creatures the shock to their senses, sensitive souls, and they are not always as grateful as they might be for it. Of the service booksellers render to poets and poetry, I will make no claim here. I am going out to walk and recite to myself the poetry I remember. The flagstone shining after rain will find voice in me. I will be the expression of absolute poetry, which is defined, I see, in a book of reference as the concrete and artistic expression of human mind and emotional and rhythmical language. In a few minutes, then, one human mind will be expressing itself in emotional rhythmical language. I will be saying over the 100th psalm from the Scottish Psalter, the road to Mandalay, Sonara non nobis, the passage from the Tempest being our revels now are ended, Gray's Elegy, I Can Say It All, Swinburne's The Pilgrims, that shortest poem in the English language by W.N. Ewer, some of the Shropshire Lad, a good whack of The Song of the Open Road, Masefield's Beauty. I will say all these between the planets and the pavement, and when I come home, none surely will deny that I am a qualified bookseller, qualified, if not to pen, at least to peddle poetry. My poet's walk ended in a pub last night, and I went to bed fuddled. I fear it was a poor ending to a day lived so much with thoughts of poetry. I commiserate myself. I do it easily. If only people knew me as I know myself, life would be more endurable. I am not at all a bad fellow, really. I was always the most popular man in my platoon in France. These seem to be in the happy halo of the unreturning past poetic days. I used to recite then, but none of the things I recited last night. The favorite was a piece called Lasca, which a Scotsman always thought had something to do with Glasgow, a place which for him was the very home of poetry and romance. It was hardly a classic piece, but I must confess that my other piece, The Speech by Cassius, Honor is the subject of my story, used to go as well. For a while I was called Cassius, but the later phases of the battle of the Somme took away those who knew my fame, and use and want returned to my abbreviated surname. This morning I feel the poetic is not at all a durable fabric. It is not like some of the goods my neighbor is displaying today, guaranteed to wash and wear. It is, alas, and God be thanked, the stuff that dreams are made on. But in army phraseology, and at the worst, it will be always doomy. It is a little life which is smoothly rounded with a sleep. We'll read one more section called Reprieve. How is it that in retrospect the late war seems pleasant to remember? I was free from anxiety about food and drink, for indeed anything who worries about the future that seems not at all likely to be his. We had our hour. It is stand to. We will surely live till they bring up the Dixies and the tea and the dirty bacon on the lids. It is between 11 and 12. In the support line, the mess orderlies can be heard putting around the stew. We will last till then. It is 4. Tea will be round very soon, and cigarettes will come up after dark. We will live till then. And so we went around the clock. Life was the immediate thing and infinitely precious. We had it. We held it. We might part as soon, but we had it, and, quote, over the past, not even the gods have power. Tomorrow to my worst, for I have had my hour. That was very often my feeling. It supported me wonderfully, but there are other times. Once in the salient in front of Zonbeek, they plastered us with a big stuff of ours. We were ordered out into no man's land after many casualties, and I remember clawing myself into the side of a shell hole in terror. My belly was quivering, and if I had to stand erect, I would have fallen out, I felt. I prayed. If I were spared, I would be different. I would repent. I would never again. I would be better. I asked in Gethsemane depths that none of this time. At 6 the bombardment stopped, and digging a new trench. That night I was chafing and bold and gay. I had been reprieved. And we'll end it there. BookTube, thank you.